At a family gathering in a quiet suburb outside Madison, Wisconsin, surrounded by relatives who believed they understood me, my mother smiled and proudly talked about my brother's newly renovated home, the square footage, the backyard, the way everything finally came together for him. Then she turned toward me, her voice carrying just enough to reach everyone at the table, and asked when I planned to do something comparable with my life. The room settled into an uncomfortable stillness. I felt the familiar weight of comparisons settle in my chest, the same pressure I'd known since childhood. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't rush to explain. I smiled. What I said next didn't sound dramatic or loud, but it quietly overturned everything they thought they knew. Before I explain how that moment unfolded, it helps to understand who I am in my family story. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 32 years old. If you passed me on the sidewalk or sat next to me at a cafe, you probably wouldn't think I was the family disappointment. I dress neatly without drawing attention. My hair is simple, usually pulled back. I move carefully through spaces, the way people do when they've learned early that being noticeable invites judgment. I work in data security, a role built on precision and responsibility. At work, people trust me with sensitive projects. They don't applaud me when things go right, but they rely on me. I've always been comfortable with that. Results speak clearly there. At home, they never seemed to. From the outside, my family looks put together. Holiday photos framed in matching sets, smiles practiced and symmetrical. My mother, Janet, values that image deeply. She believes that if people think we're close, then we must be. Appearances to her are proof enough. My father, Robert, supports that belief by staying quiet. He nods at the right moments, clears his throat when tension rises, changes the subject before anything sharp can land. He isn't cruel. He's just absent when presence matters most. Then there's my brother Evan, 3 years older than me. Confident, outgoing, endlessly affirmed. When he enters a room, my mother straightens her posture. When he speaks, my father listens with focus. When Evan succeeds, it becomes a family narrative repeated so often it grows larger each time it's told. I don't think Evan ever asked to be favored. He simply learned to expect it, and my parents learned to give it. Growing up, the imbalance appeared in subtle ways. Who sat closest to my mother at dinner, whose opinions ended arguments, whose mistakes were brushed off as growth, and whose were labeled habits. I learned early that peace was easier when I stayed quiet, so I did. I put my energy into school, then into work, then into building a life that didn't depend on applause from anyone else. By my early 30s, I wasn't asking my parents for help, approval, or validation. I told myself I was past needing it. But habits like that don't disappear entirely. A part of me still noticed when my phone stayed silent, still wondered if this time they'd remember without being reminded. That was the part of me my mother never seemed to see. Or maybe she saw it and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, it's why her comment at that gathering didn't come from nowhere. It landed on years of quiet comparison and swallowed disappointment. Something in me had already been cracking long before that night. I didn't plan anything elaborate for my birthday that year. No venue, no speeches, just dinner at my place with a few people who actually knew me. I sent the invitations early, weeks ahead, because I'd learned that if I didn't, my family would suddenly be unavailable. I followed up once, casual and light, pretending I wasn't already bracing myself. At first, there was nothing, no response at all. The silence sat heavily, growing louder the longer it lasted. My friends responded within hours. Lena asked what dessert she should bring. Marcus joked about handling the playlist. Nina offered to help me set everything up. Their messages filled my phone, highlighting the quiet from my parents even more. 2 days before my birthday, my mother finally called. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't sound excited. She went straight to explaining why they couldn't come. Something had come up for Evan, a professional milestone that apparently required immediate celebration, important enough that my birthday could be postponed yet again. I stood in my kitchen while she spoke, staring at the counter, nodding even though she couldn't see me. I said I understood because that's what I always said. After we hung up, I slid down onto the floor and let out a single sharp laugh, not because anything was funny, but because my body didn't know how else to release the disappointment. That night, I celebrated anyway, not to prove anything, just to survive the feeling. We ate takeout, drank cheap wine, and talked until midnight. When my friends asked why my parents weren't there, I shrugged and changed the subject. It wasn't lying, it was deflection, something I'd practiced for years. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a short text from my mother. Happy birthday. No call, no explanation, just the words, like a task she'd nearly forgotten. Evan didn't reach out at all. That's when something inside me shifted, quietly but firmly. I stopped correcting the story my parents told about me. When relatives asked why they hadn't seen me recently, I smiled and said I'd been busy. When my mother hinted that I should get my life together, I let it pass. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was conserving energy. A few months later, my mother invited me to a large family gathering. Everyone would be there, she said. It would be nice, she said. I agreed immediately, not because I felt hopeful, but because I felt ready. I didn't know exactly what would happen that night. I just knew I wouldn't shrink to make anyone else comfortable again. In the weeks between my birthday and that gathering, my life grew quieter in a deliberate way. I stopped waiting for my phone to light up. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining better versions of moments that had already passed. I focused on my space instead. I painted a wall I'd been ignoring, rearranged furniture until the house finally felt like mine. At night, I sat near the window with a mug of tea, watching the streetlights flicker on, reminding myself that my world was larger than my parents' approval. The silence from my family didn't mean they stopped talking. I learned that by accident. A cousin mentioned casually that my mother had told people I was still figuring things out, not quite settled yet. It wasn't said with concern, it was framed as explanation, justification for my absence. I thanked him and let the conversation drift, but the words stayed with me. That was when something finally gave way. Not the kind of collapse that ends in tears or shouting, but the quiet surrender of trying to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I realized I'd been carrying my family's version of me like a fragile object, adjusting my posture so it wouldn't slip and embarrass them. I was done with that. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't prepare speeches or gather proof. I chose something simpler and more difficult. I decided not to lie anymore, not to smooth things over, not to protect an image that erased me. If the truth surfaced, it would do so calmly, and if that made anyone uncomfortable, that discomfort wouldn't belong to me. When my mother called to confirm the gathering, her voice was cheerful, almost rehearsed. She listed who would be there, who was excited to see me. She didn't ask how I'd been. She didn't mention my birthday. I told her I'd be there, nothing more. The night before the gathering, I stood in my bedroom deciding what to wear. Not to impress, not to provoke. I chose something simple and understated, the kind of outfit that lets you blend in until you choose not to. I went to bed early and slept better than I expected. I didn't know what my mother planned to say the next day. I didn't know how Evan would behave with an audience. What I did know was that I wasn't walking into that house as the version of me they were used to. I was walking in as myself, with nothing to hide and nothing to ask for. The house was already loud when I arrived. Not warm loud, not the kind that comes from shared joy, but restless loud. Layered conversations overlapping because everyone was performing for someone else. I paused just inside the doorway and let the noise wash over me. Laughter bounced off the walls, glasses clinked. Someone called my name, surprised that I had actually shown up. The dining table had been extended to fit everyone. My mother had gone all out, the way she always did when there was an audience. Matching place settings, candles with a faint floral scent, everything arranged to suggest closeness and harmony. I spotted Evan immediately. He stood near the center of the room, one hand resting casually on a chair, telling a story with animated gestures. People leaned in as he spoke. My father hovered nearby, refilling drinks, nodding along. My mother noticed me and smiled too quickly. "Rachel, you made it," she said, already turning back to the group before I could respond. That smile wasn't for me, it was for the room. I took a seat near the end of the table. Not by accident, that was where I usually landed. I didn't mind. From there, I could observe without being pulled into the center of the noise. Plates were passed, conversations overlapped. A few relatives asked how work was going, whether I was seeing anyone. I answered politely and briefly. No one pressed. They rarely did. Halfway through dinner, my mother stood and tapped her glass with a fork. The sound cut through the room. Conversation slowed, then stopped. She waited until she had everyone's attention, posture straight, expression proud. "I just want to take a moment," she said, glancing toward Evan, "to celebrate something very special." She gestured toward him. "Evan has just completed the renovation on his house, and it's absolutely perfect." Applause rippled around the table. Smiles, nods, murmured congratulations. Evan dipped his head modestly while clearly enjoying the attention. My father raised his glass. My mother continued, listing details I didn't need to hear. The neighborhood, the upgrades, how proud she was. Then she turned to me, not casually, not kindly, deliberately. "And Rachel," she said lightly, though there was a sharp edge beneath it, "when do you think you'll finally accomplish something like that?" The room went still. I felt it before I saw it. Forks paused midair. Someone coughed. A chair shifted. Every face turned toward me, curiosity flickering behind polite expressions. This was the moment she had set up without warning, confident I would laugh it off or shrink back into myself. I didn't. I placed my fork down slowly. I took a sip of water. I could hear my breathing, steady and controlled, even as my heart thudded against my ribs. For a brief moment, I considered saying nothing, letting the silence work in everyone else's favor. But I had spent too many years letting silence work in everyone else's favor. So I smiled. Not smug, not forced, just calm. "I already have," I said. My mother blinked. "What?" "I bought a house," I repeated evenly. "I've been living there for months." The reaction was immediate. A sharp inhale from somewhere down the table. Someone whispered, "Wait, what?" My father froze mid-sip, his glass hovering near his mouth. Evan's smile faltered, confusion flashing across his face before he masked it. My mother let out a short, uncertain laugh. "That's not funny," she said. "Why would you joke about that?" "I'm not joking," I replied gently. "It's a 3-bedroom place. There's a small terrace and a garden. It's quiet. I like it." The room didn't erupt with noise, but with questions. When? How? Why didn't we know? My mother's face shifted through disbelief, then irritation, then something closer to panic. "If that's true," she said slowly, "why didn't you tell us?" I met her eyes. "You could have known," I said. "I celebrated my birthday there. I invited you." The words landed heavier than I expected. A few people gasped. Someone dropped a napkin. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Color crept up her neck. "That's not fair," she said. "We had a conflict." I nodded. "You did," I said. "You chose something else." The silence stretched. My aunt looked between us, brow furrowed. "Janet," she said carefully, "you didn't go to Rachel's birthday?" My mother waved her hand dismissively. "It was complicated." "It wasn't," I said quietly. "I wasn't angry. You said it wasn't important enough to change your plans." My father finally spoke. "Rachel, this isn't the time." "When would be?" I asked softly. Evan shifted in his seat. "You didn't have to say it like that," he said. "This was supposed to be a nice night." "I didn't ruin anything," I replied, turning to him. "I answered a question." The room buzzed with restrained tension. People exchanged glances. Pieces were clicking into place, the way they do when a story you've been told starts to unravel. My mother's hands trembled as she smoothed the tablecloth. "You're making us look bad," she hissed. "I'm not making you look like anything," I said evenly. "I'm just not hiding anymore." No one applauded, no one cheered, but something shifted. The authority my mother relied on, the assumption that her version of events would go unchallenged, cracked right there at the table. I stood, smoothing my dress, my movements unhurried. "I think I'm going to head out," I said. "Thank you for dinner." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't look back as I walked toward the door. Behind me, voices overlapped, questions rising faster than my parents could answer. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. I took a deep breath as I reached my car, my hand steady on the door handle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt clear. The aftermath didn't explode all at once. It rippled outward, quiet but persistent. Over the next few days, my phone lit up with numbers I hadn't seen in years. A cousin asking if I was okay, an aunt apologizing for believing things she'd never thought to question. Message after message, each one peeling back the version of me my parents had been presenting. No one called to yell, no one demanded explanations. Most just said they hadn't known. And for the first time, I believed them. My parents didn't reach out right away. When they finally did, it wasn't to ask how I was. It was to complain about how uncomfortable the dinner had been, about people asking questions they didn't like, about how Evan's celebration had been overshadowed. I listened without interrupting, then told them I wasn't going to explain myself again. I wasn't angry, I was finished. After that, Evan stopped posting about his house. A few gatherings he'd planned quietly fell apart when relatives declined. I didn't feel satisfaction, I just noticed the shift. What surprised me most was how peaceful things became. Invitations started coming directly to me, not as an afterthought. People asked about my work, my home, my life, and actually listened. I wasn't proving anything anymore, I was simply present. Losing control of the narrative forced my parents to face something they'd avoided for years, and it gave me something I didn't realize I needed: space to exist without comparison. Looking back, buying a house wasn't the real accomplishment. Learning to stop shrinking for people who only valued me in relation to someone else was. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth calmly and walk away. If this story resonated with you, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this, share it with friends who might need to hear it, and comment below with your own perspective or the biggest lesson you took away.